there's something about a baby that brings people together. There was no room in the inn, but someone actually found room for the Christ child. The shepherds were outsiders, not just out in the fields at dark, but they were kind of outsiders that people had no time for. And the shepherds were welcomed when they came in to see the Christ child. The wise men, they were people of a different religion, a different culture, a different language, who traveled from afar, and they too were made welcome. There's something about a baby that kind of brings people together. But there is also something about a baby that is very vulnerable. And there's quite a dark side to the Christmas story, because the regime that the people were under at that time was quite a brutal regime of a client king with the Roman Empire. And that client king, Herod, wanted to make a major statement of power. And he held people in his grip. And so comes that moment when he determines to eradicate the newborn child. And there's a massacre in Bethlehem of the little ones, of the children. And it's a pretty difficult moment. And so what do Mary and Joseph do with the Christ child? But they flee. They flee for their lives. And the journey is a very difficult journey. It's a cruel desert, the Sinai desert. They end up in Egypt, a long way away, different religion, different culture, different language. But there are people there who make them welcome and make them at home. And after 2 years, then they hear that Herod the Great has died. They think there's an opportunity to return. They return in safety. There's something about a baby that brings people together that makes for a welcome. In all the Christmas services that we've had and Christmas events that we've had, there's one image that has caught my eye this year. And it's an image of a sculpture by Josefina de Vasconcelos. She's, I think, a remarkable sculptor of the 20th century who died at about 102, just at the turn of the century. And she it was who designed a crib scene to be put in Trafalgar Square in about 1959. And the vicar of St. Martin's in the Fields wanted a crib to go under the tree, but the authorities did not accept that that was an appropriate thing to do. And there was an incredible tussle. There was debate in the House of Commons, there were letters to the Times, there was a leading article in the Times, and eventually the Vicar of St. Martin in the Fields prevailed. A crib was placed under the tree, and the person commissioned to do that crib was Josefina de Vasconcelos, who had done wonderful cribs for lots of cathedrals, lots of public places up and down the country. And one of her crib scenes remains in Gloucester Cathedral, which is a mirror image of the one that's over in Liverpool Cathedral as well. And she it was who designed the figures. They lasted from 1959 to about 1999. I did say to someone earlier that I wasn't going to mention football. That was definitely last year. But rugby seems not to be mentionable this year either. But hey-ho, there we go. When England won the World Cup, there were celebrations in Trafalgar Square just before Christmas. And the crib scene that Josefina de Vasconcelos had put together and had been used for 40 years got damaged. And so it was replaced. If you go to St. Martin in the Fields in Trafalgar Square now, there's the most wonderful sculpture. Very simple. It's a block of granite, and out of the top is just carved a baby, and that's all there is to it. And it's a wonderful, wonderful statement of the Word made flesh. But that vicar in St. Martin in the Fields already had commissioned a piece from Josefina de Vasconcelos. He knew the sculptor. He knew the work that she could produce. It had been the previous year. We're at the end of the 50s. The refugee crisis at the end of the Second World War didn't finish in a year. It continued. And then it was added to, because you'd got the Hungarian Rising, you've got the whole business of the Iron Curtain, there was flight, there was refuge sought. And so there was determination to make that a special year, acknowledging the refugee. And St. Martin of Fields rector, very, very politically minded person, commissioned this sculpture. And it has a simple title. They fled by night. And it captures the flight of Mary and Joseph. And Mary and Joseph are shattered. They look exhausted. If you see the picture up close, it's now in Cartmel Priory, up in the Lake District, because Josephina de Vasconcelos was a neighbour to Beatrix Potter and very good friends up in the Lake District. They did a lot together, and it's a very, very powerful image. I've only seen it in this photograph, but it's very, very powerful. Joseph, Mary look distraught, they look haggard, they look exhausted, they're fast asleep. And the Christ child has just woken up. And he's kind of pushing himself up on his mother's feet. Is it that he's been startled and there's something fearful going on and he's pushing himself up to see what it is? Is it that dawn is breaking and something lovely is going on? You just don't know. But it captures that wonderful moment. They fled by night. And for me, that's the image for Christmas this year. Because the refugee crisis that is faced at the moment is on a larger scale than the refugee crisis that tore apart the 40s and then into the 50s, up to the point at which this sculpture had to be made as a statement. And it seems to me at Christmas time that one of the things of the Christmas story is the welcome that were given to the unexpected people. The welcome to Mary and Joseph in the inn, albeit out at the stable. The welcome of the shepherds, the welcome of the wise men, and the welcome Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus had when they went far away to Egypt. So, we have been involved with other churches in the town in the creation of a new organisation just in the last 2 or 3 months called Cheltenham Welcomes Refugees. And it seems to me that there are 3 things in particular that we should be doing in response to the refugee crisis at the moment. First, practical things, and that's what Cheltenham Welcomes Refugees is about in large measure. And we put together, I think, a couple of hampers that were going to be used for the 5 families that have come over here from Syria. A number of us went to an event at the university that brought people together from the different faith communities in Cheltenham. And it was very moving to hear the mother of one of those families appreciative of the welcome they had received in Cheltenham and describing a little bit of her terrifying story. And you're refugees and you think kind of different people. You hear someone speaking and you talk to them afterwards and you realize it's someone just like you, fleeing from a place just like your place and finding a welcome here that they valued. There are practical things to do in terms of giving things. The funding that they get centrally is just to set them up. But after the first couple of months, then they're kind of on their own and dependent, if they want a mobile phone or if they want something like that, they are dependent and they need more help than they will get from the state. So there are practical things to do. I actually think there are political things to do. I think the New Testament is a very political statement in all sorts of ways of Christ offering a different way of ordering society, which he calls the kingdom of God, to the brutality of the Roman Empire at the time. And I think likewise with us, we have a responsibility following in the footsteps of Jesus to make a political statement to those in power, saying that we should be a welcoming nation. And that the numbers that we anticipate of 20,000 over a 5-year period, when you see the scale of the refugee crisis that's swept through Europe, is just infinitesimally small. And I think that there's a political thing that we should be doing to foster that spirit of welcome we have as a nation. But finally, I think there is something even more important than the practical and the political, and that's the personal. And this was the emphasis in the meeting we went to. It's what we say in the conversations we have with our neighbours. And if you think of the number of people that we've got here today, if each of us ensured that when we were talking about the refugee crisis, we were welcoming, in a welcoming spirit, that is so important in our society at the moment. 2016 has been a strange year, disturbing year. Some will think it an exciting year. And in amongst this year has been a rise in xenophobia, a rise in divisions. And it's so important that in our conversations we have a welcoming spirit. The meeting we went to was at the university. The Vice-Chancellor of the university started the meeting off, and he spoke of something that had not happened in the university's experience before, really. It was one of their young students in their first term here was accosted and attacked, albeit only verbally, but verbally in a very menacing kind of way, simply for having come from Eastern Europe. And the divisions that have come into our society at the moment this year are major divisions which can only be responded to by people, and it's us. And the conversations that we have, the views that we express, how we respond to people is a key part in being a welcoming people. Because the welcome of the Christmas story is the welcome that we need to have in our hearts very much as 2016 turns into a 2017 that we just don't know what has in store for us. Let's just be quiet a moment. Gracious, loving God, may that Christmas spirit of welcome shape the way we think, the way we talk, and the way we act in response to this refugee crisis. And may the welcoming spirit we have at Christmas be a welcoming spirit the year through. Amen.